Let's start by introducing Neil. Neil McKeganey is, I guess you're the director of the Centre for Drug Misuse Research in Glasgow. I've known Neil for some time, and we often worked in situations where we were talking about recovery and it felt like we were in a bunker, really, because recovery wasn't always the kind of welcome, happy, clappy word or concept that it is today. It can be a difficult concept, certainly for policymakers sometimes, to grasp. But Neil has worked in this field for years, really. He did the Glasgow estimates for, if you work in a drug action team or you know anything about prevalence studies, then the numbers that we use to work out how many drug users we got in a certain area, or problem drug users, or whatever you want to call them, this guy did the numbers for them. He did the work behind the scenes that allowed the UK to work out its prevalence estimates. He's going to talk to us today about legal highs. He's just finished doing a study for us in Buckinghamshire on legal highs, but as part of that, he ended up doing the first national online survey for legal highs. And some interesting information and understanding has come out of that, and he's going to give you a summary. We heard the full thing yesterday. It was 2 hours, and it was riveting. It really was a 2-hour presentation and discussion. He hasn't got 2 hours this morning, he's got half an hour, but I'm hoping that you'll find him informative, enjoyable, and yeah, welcome Neil.
So I'd just like to say good morning to everyone here. As Huseyin said, I've been doing work in the drugs field, studying it for probably now about sort of 25 or so years, and I spend my time sort of writing about sort of drug abuse, and as Huseyin said, there are times when it feels that one is literally in a bunker, because the field of drug abuse is so divided. So where I've written in the past about the dangers of legalisation and the impact of parental drug use on children, it's been, to put it mildly, quite controversial. And it's evident at times that whenever you express a view about drug use or drug misuse or whatever, you rapidly offend people, because by no means does everybody share the same view. Like, their views are extraordinarily divided, and it often seems when I speak that half the people in the room will be happy to kill me, and half the people in the room are happy that I'm actually speaking, because there is very little consensus around this drugs issue. But it's unimaginable, in a way, the impact that drug use has had on our society. I think if you asked anybody 30 years ago, what do you think the scale of the drugs problem would be, nobody would have come up with a scenario which is where we are now. I mean, it's trite in a way, because currently I'm involved in a study looking at drug use and the treatment of drug users in prison. And if you watch the programme Porridge, you won't see a single reference to drugs in Porridge at all. It's just not there. It doesn't exist. If you made a situation comedy now about prison, you barely could mention anything other than drugs, because drugs has become so prevalent in our society, and it's transformed so much. I mean, if you watch the police, you know, the series they film police going about their routine tasks, it's staggering how much of their work is tied up with dealing with people with drug problems. That's by and large what policing has become. It's become policing our drug problem. And I think that there is a predominant sense which in some ways are unhelpful. The nature of the drug problem we have now is the nature of the drug problem that we've always had, and that we always will have. And I think one of the things that's struck me over the years is how inaccurate that perception is. Firstly, we haven't always had a drug problem that we have at the scale of it at the present time. But also, there's a kind of misplaced confidence or reassurance that the drugs in the future will be largely like it is now. And the subject that I'm going to tell you a bit about, legal highs, is in many ways a complete game changer. It's going to, and is, entirely transforming the whole notion of drug abuse, drugs consumption, from something with which we're reasonably familiar, the use of heroin, cocaine, LSD, cannabis, to something which is completely new, mind-bogglingly varied. And it's like drug abuse met Hollywood, met the marketing mavericks. Because when you actually if anybody Googles legal highs on the internet, what you see there is an array, a staggering array of substances with the most exotic names that you could conceive, promising a kind of journey into chemistry, which is completely different to anything that anyone has seen ever before. I mean, there were people using heroin and cocaine, and they knew what those drugs were, and they knew what the effects were, and that's what they were looking for. Now, through the internet and through shops on high streets, we have a range of substances. The best estimate is now around about 360 different drugs, where you can take them, you can change your mind entirely, you can be excited, you can depress, you can be empathic, you can dissociate from yourself, and they're marketed like the next Hollywood blockbuster. So even if you were not interested in legal highs, if you go onto the internet, you will be fascinated at what is now actually happening. And yet these are, in many respects, incredibly dangerous drugs that are now being openly sold. And it's I think, in the face of not the expertise, but the lack of knowledge as to what is now happening, and the worry about what is now happening, that Bucks commissioned my research centre to carry out research in this area and in others about the nature of legal high use. And when I tell you that the numbers of deaths associated with legal highs has increased some 600% in 3 years, that tells you that we're not dealing here now with something which is of exotic interest. We're dealing with something which is resulting in a huge number of deaths and potentially an escalating number of deaths. And yet it's a world of mystery. I mean, I'm a drugs expert. I've been doing drug abuse research for 25 years, and I have books to my name and academic papers and an academic title. But I don't stand here as an expert, because this is an entirely new departure into the realm of drug taking, which all of us are like fledglings. We are just beginning to try to understand what is happening here, and it is transformative. And I feel that in a relatively short period of time, the nature of the drug problem we have will be so different to what it is at present. Our services, in many respects, will be, unless they really address this problem, will be almost irrelevant. They won't know how to deal with this problem. They won't know how to contact the people involved in this problem. And it's that order of challenge. So to get a sense of the nature of legal high use, we carried out what's called a national online survey, which is that we opened up a website and it was advertised through social media. Because our world now is a world of social media. Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. And we asked people if they would fill in our questionnaire, which is available online, and it still is available online. And you might think, well, who on earth would do that? Why would anyone do that? It's about a 20-minute survey, and we started it in March. And I think we have now around about 1,300 people who actually completed it. And we asked people to complete it, both those who used legal highs and those who hadn't used legal highs, because we were interested in how vulnerable are people to legal high use. So we wanted to know about those who use these drugs, but we also wanted to know information from people who hadn't used them, but who might consider using them in the near future. So I'll just show you some of the things that came through from that survey. So, that's not, I wonder if you can turn the lights down a bit.
Well, we have actually. It's the sun. I know. It just, I can take those down, but it's actually unfortunately.
It's up a bit. Like, I'm a bit short-sighted.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, so if I turn around, I think so. Yeah. So okay, so you can see that. What's the pointer?
It's that red. It's that red line.
Yeah. So that's the age range. So the ones who never take illegal highs, that's the average around about 27. The ones who've never taken were a bit older. The split between male and females was that, which is somewhat unusual in drug studies. Most research on drug abuse identifies many more men than women. Drug abuse seems to be much more common amongst men than women. But in relation to legal highs, there's a much closer, almost parity between those who are using these substances. Because it was funded from bucks, we were particularly interested in the extent of it here, in this area. But 85% were actually outside of bucks because it was a national, online survey. But we asked the young people who completed this about they're called novel psychoactive substances. That's the sort of dry academic term for so-called legal highs. We asked them about what drugs they were using, and then we were able to identify what the effects of the different drugs they were using. So that's the range of drugs. So the most commonly used substances were synthetic cannabinoids, then stimulants, then psychedelics, and pathogens, and drugs with a dissociative effect. Those range from ecstasy, ketamine, in relation to these dissociative, the sense of out-of-body type experiences. So that's the range of effects associated with the different drugs people were using. Within the bucks area in particular, we were interested in the most commonly used drugs were the dissociative drugs. That's the national pattern here, which is that, so these drugs are not the most commonly used, but within this area, within Buckinghamshire, that they certainly were the most popular drugs that were being consumed. We were interested in how frequently are people using these drugs, and this slide here gives you a sense. So there's a small group here, around about 12%, who are using them every day, or 3 to 4 times a week. So that's high frequency use of these substances. They've already made a big impact on their lives, and they've been well integrated into their daily lives. Then there's another group here who are using them much less frequently. They're by no means a day-to-day occurrence. They may be sort of once a month or once a fortnight. And there's another group here who are using them occasionally and repeatedly, but not with the same order of frequency as these ones over here. So there are different styles of using these substances. We wanted to know, because as you'll know, there's been a great deal of information in the press about how dangerous these drugs are. So we asked people about their judgment, about how risky they thought that they were. And you can see here that on this right-hand side, 13% and 6%, 19%, nearly 20%, nearly a fifth, understood that these drugs were carrying a very high risk, and 6% were well aware that they could carry a fatal risk. These are the users. So there's no question that the individuals using these drugs are well aware of the risks, the very serious risks. But there is still a perception, that's a quarter, who think they only carry a low risk. And there are some who think they carry a small number, who think they carry no risk whatsoever. So, in a way, you can see here that this is a style of drug use which is, people are beginning to formulate an understanding. of significance of it, a perception that it can be very risky, but still a perception on some people that it's not that risky. But what sort of effects did they report, the users report here? And if you, I hope you can see those figures, but if you can't, if you concentrate on the red sections of this bar chart, these are all the range of effects. Some of them were described as positive effects, so there was a perception that use of these drugs would increase individual sex drive, and that was one of the most commonly reported effects. But there's a whole range of negative effects as well, from agitation, aggression, depression, being drowsy, experiencing hallucinations, headaches, heart palpitations, ranging all the way through here. And these are the effects that individuals have reported experiencing on many occasions. So these are not one-off experiences of these drugs, arising from these drugs. These are experiences which are part and parcel of this style of drug use. And that's quite important, because typically one hopes to see, if you like, that the negative effects of certain drugs produces a reluctance or a reticence to use it in the future. But that may well not be the case here. But there is an expectation that I know I'm going to experience some of these serious adverse effects, but that's not going to discourage me from continuing to use them. It's something that's quite unusual, I think, about this style of drug use, which is that it's producing a kind of lay chemistry, that people are avowedly experimenting on their own bodies with these substances, so that they know the process of experimentation will on occasion produce serious adverse effects. But the nature of those effects isn't going to stop them. It's part and parcel of this kind of widespread experiment with what these drugs are and what the effects are. We were keen to try to find out, are people using these substances alongside other drugs, or do they tend to only use, when they're using legal highs, do they tend to only use legal highs? And you can see here that there's quite widespread use of other substances, so alcohol, cannabis, these other substances here are commonly used. So the red sections are many times, the yellow sections are sometimes. So there's a significant degree to which this style of drug use is being combined with other substances. And there's a proportion here who are using, that's nearly 10%, who are using legal highs alongside their prescribed medication. And that's prescribed mental health medication for the most part. And at the moment, we don't by any means understand what is the likely effect where an individual has a pre-existing mental health problem who's also now consuming legal highs. You would have seen from the effects chart that many of those effects are psychological effects. And there is a very strong likelihood, almost an inevitability, that in many instances the use of legal highs, where it's being combined with prescribed mental health medication, is having a serious adverse effect either on the effectiveness of that medication or maybe exacerbating some of the mental health problems that individuals are experiencing alongside their legal high use. Now, where are they getting legal highs from? So these are the range of venues and sites where the individuals are accessing legal highs. So from a shop, that's the most common source of these legal highs, but only slightly more than friends, or from a website. Now you'll have heard certainly that the internet is a major source of these drugs, but what's evident there is that the mechanisms or the outlets for supply are very close. So you don't have to go on the internet to actually source these drugs now. You can actually source them from the high street. I don't know if you have a legal high shop in this area, but there's certainly many areas where there are legal high shops. These are substances that you can pick up now in in garages, some in supermarkets, some in newsagents. That they have penetrated the world of marketing, if you like. But typically from friends. So they become part and parcel of friendship networks now. They are not unusual. It's not unusual to know someone, and it's not unusual to source these drugs from people that you know well. The reasons for use. And here, that's a striking one. So this scale here is the level of agreement with do you disagree, are you agnostic, or do you agree strongly with these statements? So it's a measure of how far people agree with these statements. So we asked them about what was their reasons for use. And the one that came through most strongly was being curious and wanting to experiment. And that is a change, if you like, in the culture of drug use now that's associated with novel psychoactive substances. An explicit interest in exploring what these drugs are about. Interested in what's the latest drug that's now being marketed. I want to experiment, I want to find out on my body what these drugs will feel like. That they're cheaper, that's important, they're cheaper than illegal drugs. And that you can take them without breaking the law. Now that's ambiguous because we know that in many instances the contents of drugs that are being sold as legal highs often include substances that are scheduled, that are illegal. The possession of them it breaks the law. But there is a perception, aside from the actual chemical constituents of these drugs, that they're not illegal. And for many individuals that's an important aspect of their use. What attracts them to these drugs as distinct from heroin, cocaine and such like, that they know they're not breaking any law in using these drugs or having them in their possession. But what are they being sold as? And here you see something that's completely different. So the range of ways in which these drugs are being sold, what are people buying when they're buying these substances, or how they're being marketed, is in itself quite something. So just under half are being explicitly sold as legal highs, even though in many instances they will contain substances that are illegal. They're labelled, presented as legal highs, nevertheless. Marked not for human consumption, just under a half. Labelled as, presented as herbal highs or research chemicals or plant food, herbal incest or such smoking blend. That research chemicals interesting, that's nearly a third. Nearly a third of these substances, or people reporting having bought them, presented as almost like a chemistry experiment for you. That if you want, we don't know what these effects are. You won't know, but there's something for you to experiment and find out. And that too is part and parcel of the appeal of these drugs. Party pills, herbal products, bath salts, room deodorizers, potpourri, exotic incense, air fresheners and pond cleaners. Now, 5 years ago, if you said there are substances being sold as plant food, you thought, well, no, that's ridiculous. Who on earth would want to actually consume a substance that's actually being presented as pond cleaner, or air freshener, or room deodorizers? But that's the transformation that's now occurring, marketing of substances in a totally different way to how they've been marketed in the past. Now, if you got into difficulty, if you were a legal high user and you got into difficulty, you started experiencing some of the adverse effects that are by no means uncommonly associated with this form of drug use, where would you go to get help? Well, you might think, well, I'd hope that you'd go to your doctor or call 999 or go to places that are already well identified as sources of information and assistance for people who get into physical, psychological difficulty. Well, if you did think that, you'd be wrong, because most people, when asked about what would you do if you got into difficulty, would consult a friend or go to an online chat room. So the places that you go to get advice as to how to respond to this form of drug use is not by and large a drop-in centre or an A&E department. It's principally part and parcel of this community. People have been in contact on the internet or friends, and there is a perception, whether it's because you don't want to attract, you don't want to identify yourself as a legal high user, to some of the agencies that are more traditionally concerned with treating drug use, or whether you don't think that they will know very much about this new form of drug use, and that's why you're not going. But there's the clear indication that that's where people will go to their friends and online chat rooms to get assistance. How prevalent is it amongst friends? Well, a few of my friends using that, this differentiation between blue and red are the ever takers and the orange is the never takers. So amongst these here, 60% of the ever takers have friends, a few of their friends using legal highs. But also, that's interesting too, 3/4 of those who are not users have friends who are using legal highs. And now that's really important, because if having friends who are using these drugs is an important factor influencing the likelihood of future use, the fact that now such a high proportion of even those who aren't using these substances have friends who are using these substances, that suggests that we may well by no means be at the upper level of the escalation of this style of drug use. It may expand substantially beyond where we are at the present time. Down here, most of my friends, so the ever takers, 13%, most of their friends are. But that clearly shows you the penetration of this style of drug use into friendship networks. But if you haven't used legal high, and you're one of our never users as opposed to our ever users, to what extent is that a determined status? But you're not going to use legal highs, they're not for you, it doesn't matter how they're marketed, it doesn't matter what proportion of your friends start using these substances, you're never actually going to use them yourself. So we ask people about their likelihood of future use. So if you take the never takers here, and it's these sections here which is actually quite revealing. So that shows you that even amongst the never takers, 18%, 19, 20, 20% of those who haven't say that they might, they probably, or they definitely will in the future. So of this 1,000 odd people, 20% of those who haven't used are clearly indicating that they might use in the future, or that they very probably will use in the future. So if you wanted a measure of, are we now at the upper level of prevalence of this new style of drug use, or is it a pattern of drug use which has some considerable way to go beyond where we are now, you would say on the basis of that information there that we are by no means at the end of this new style of drug use, that even those who currently haven't used are indicating a propensity to use in the future. Factors that might influence future use. So what sort of things might influence whether individuals use these drugs in the future? And again, that's those who've never taken these substances and those who have taken them. So if I read online about the good times people have had when they're taking a legal high, that comes out as a strong factor, continue to influence and bolster those who have used legal highs. That reaffirms that this is something that they're really interested in finding out more about. If friends try them first and warn me not to try them, that's a small element of the never takers. If scientists tell the public exactly what chemicals are in the legal highs, that influences the ever takers and the never takers, but not to a massive degree. If friends try them first and recommend them, that comes through really strongly. So that ever takers very often have friends who've used them, and that bolsters their own interest in them. But it's also an element of the non-users as well, that if they have friends, that might influence their use. If they're sold in more places, they become more widely available, that draws strong agreement amongst those who've used these substances. Again, if they become cheaper, if they become illegal, that has some effect, and more information about, more news reports about legal highs. So the ever takers may be quite interested and encouraged in their use, even by the fact that these substances are being talked about in the media. How much do the users agree with these permissive statements and the non-users as well? Legal highs might make a night out much better. There's some agreement there amongst the users and also some about the non-users. Here's a really one where there's strong use. Legal highs are too risky. You never know what's in them. That perception being strong amongst the never takers, but it's also clearly understood amongst the users as well that you don't actually know what's in them, and it is risky to take them. But for the users, that isn't discouraging them from use of these substances. The perception, this is important too, that legal highs aren't real drug users. That draws quite a lot of agreement amongst those who are using these substances. And in a way, that amongst the users of these substances, there was a perception that if you use these substances but you're not using heroin and cocaine, those are the people using those substances are the drug users. What I'm doing with my legal high use doesn't make me a drug user. And that's important in terms of what services can do, because if services tend to orient towards people who they perceive as drug users, but the users themselves don't see themselves as drug users, they're not going to contact those services. And in a way, that's a massive challenge for services, which are typically, traditionally, have a very drug user look and feel to them. So what we may now be seeing is the development of a generation of drug users who are completely different, or substantially different to the people that are typically going to drug treatment services or have been for some considerable time. But those are not two entirely different populations, because it is evident too that many of those who have a well-established pattern of drug use, they're using heroin, cocaine repeatedly and have become dependent and are what many people regard as problematic drug users, they are also using these new chemicals as well, and in many instances they use them, they see them as a form of treatment for their addiction. So there's likely to be a large group of people who don't consider themselves as drug users, who are using these chemicals, and a smaller group of people who are addicts and who are self-identified as individuals with drug problems, who are also using these drugs as well. Now, who wants more information about legal highs and what? So the never takers, they recognise that hearing about deaths amongst those who've used these substances, that bolsters their decision to not use these drugs themselves. So it's important. They want to know about the negative consequences, because that reaffirms their decision not to use themselves. Those who have taken these substances, they're less interested, or they say that is less a factor which is going to influence their use. Information about the health risks, that's strong for the never takers, and information about what chemicals are in the different legal highs, that's also strong for both the users and the non-users. Ironically, or somewhat unexpectedly, those who haven't taken, they want information about where these drugs are available. So they've heard that they're available, but they might not know exactly where they're available. So even amongst the non-users here, I would like to know more about where these drugs might be sourced. And if you combine that with the 20% of non-users saying, I think I might use at some point in the future, and you've got a significant proportion of there saying, I'd like to find out where these drugs are being sold, you can see that there is a real possibility that proportion of I might use in the future, as these drugs become more available in more sources, will translate into, well, actually now I have used it, now I have experimented with them. I won't so much go into that. That's just a range of possible implications for services. But I think the thing that I would reiterate is that what's happening now is a world with which we were very familiar as experts and service providers, etc., in terms of their drug use, in terms of the nature of drug use, what drugs people were using, and what were their effects, and how to help people who had become dependent on them, and how to recognise the problems of dependence, that's now changing massively. So if you said to me, what's the problem about using heroin? I'll say to you, well, at the outset, there aren't many problems. It's a pleasurable experience, but over time it becomes an enslaving experience. The person becomes an addict, and their lives are transformed, as is in many instances are the lives of people who are close to them, their family and friends. And there's a sort of predictable and expected sequence of stages which those individuals will go through. In relation to legal highs, it's not like that at all. So it's the unpredictable, the unexpected, the immediate, not the long-term use that may be actually presenting a problem with each drug. It's the fact that I'm consuming a chemical which I've got no idea what that chemical is, and I've got no idea what effect it's going to have. But it's been sold to me as a drug that's going to make me feel great, or it's going to improve my sex, or it's going to take me on a kind of going to stimulate a sense of empathy or love or whatever, and that's what I'm really attracted to. But it might kill me. So a night that starts out like any other night ends up on a mortuary slab for some of the individuals using these substances, and that isn't hysterical anti-drugs propaganda. That is actually the very real possibility of what's happening here. And you know, it's odd in a way that we fret and we have our drug laws and we have enforcement and we have drug dealing being tackled and substantial criminal justice sanctions directed at those who are marketing these, not these drugs, but the traditional, typical drugs of abuse. And yet here we have a form of drug use which is everywhere, which is potentially available one click on the internet away from ordering it and having it delivered to your doorstep. That is, in a sense, the transformative nature of this drug problem. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. It's an area about which we know relatively little. It's changing very rapidly indeed, and they're available almost increasingly anywhere you go. You can get these substances without any difficulty whatsoever. We don't even worry what, in many instances, is even in these substances. They're being produced out of laboratories in China and India and various other countries, marketed through the internet, often not labelled as being for human consumption, but they are being consumed by young people and others. And that is a massive game changer. That renders us all, in a sense, none of us are experts here. And if you say, well, who becomes a drug user in society? Is it anybody, or is it potentially everybody? We don't really actually know the answer to that question. I mean, in the past, people talked about an addictive gene that influences why some people start to use some substances and they become addicted to them. Other people can use the same substances and never become addicted to them. Some people have an interest in taking drugs, others have no interest in taking drugs. But in this respect, this could be changing that fundamentally as well, because in many instances what's being sold here they're not being even sold as drugs at all. They're being sold as experiences. And who doesn't want to experience something? You know, the oldest person in our national online survey, if I asked you to guess what that was, you'd never guess it, because it was 71. So there's a 71-year-old using legal highs because they're interested in what are these drugs. I'd like to find out what they are. And that shows you that they're opening up to a realm of interest amongst people that is way beyond anything that we've seen in the past. And in a sense, all of this changed with ecstasy. Because up until the point where ecstasy was being sold, people were buying drugs largely with a name that told them what that drug was, whether it was hash or LSD or or heroin or whatever. You went to your dealer and you asked for a specific drug, or they were offered a specific drug, and you knew exactly what that was. It might be good, bad, or different quality heroin, or good, bad, or different cannabis, but you didn't go, you weren't consuming heroin thinking you were consuming cannabis, and you weren't smoking cannabis thinking, for the most part, that you were actually smoking opium or whatever. You basically knew what you were doing. That's not the case anymore, and it wasn't the case when ecstasy started being marketed. So ecstasy, when it was initially developed, was going to be called empathy, because of the feeling that it induces amongst users. But those who developed it felt that ecstasy was a name that would sell and would appeal to a much wider audience, a much wider market, because who doesn't want to feel ecstatic about something? And that, you know, in a sense, was the point at which pharmacology met marketing, and it became a way of selling drugs consumption through experience, not pharmacology. Pharmacology suddenly became irrelevant. You didn't really mind or map or even know or care what was in the tablets. What you were buying into was the promise of this exotic experience. And when you start selling drugs with the name annihilation, you're doing the same thing. But it's puzzling, isn't it? Why would anyone want to take a substance that's promising annihilation? There is something about the culture of drug use which is now evolving, which is opening up the potential of many people to experience something which is beyond anything they've experienced up till now. And that's the appeal of this new style of drug use. And that's why, in a sense, it potentially represents a problem on a scale like nothing that we've seen up till now. So, if you wonder sometimes about how prevalent is heroin use in society, despite the images that are conveyed in the newspaper, it's actually quite rare. 1.5 to 2% of the population. So 98% of the population in the UK have not used and will not use heroin, even though it's a problem. It's a drug use which is very prominent in the media. Because many people, most people, have no real interest in taking heroin. They may be fearful and it's illegal, so they don't necessarily want to break the law. That may well not be the case now with these substances. You can take them without fear, for the most part, of criminal prosecution, and you can just get into the experience. But the danger, of course, is the serious adverse effects associated with this style of drug use. Okay, that's it.